Hello, this is Matthew here from the Nations of Sanity Project. I'm sitting down here for a conversation with Dennis Pratt to speak about many things, libertarianism, but primarily about the Free State Project that he's heavily involved with. And I'm very interested in learning a lot more about. And hopefully, we'll also talk about many aspects that relate to that, which obviously the underlying principle of individual self ownership. And I also would like to speak about the Nations of Sanity Project and get Dennis's thoughts on that as well. So, thank you very much, Dennis, for taking the time to have this conversation. And perhaps you give yourself a little introduction beyond what I have.
Sure, thank you, Matthew. I'm actually very excited to talk to you. It's rare, I've written a couple thousand articles on libertarianism from an ethical perspective, but most of the people I talk to are utilitarian, and they're a little bit loosely around NAP and self ownership, but rarely are they solidly that that's where we're coming from. That's our wellspring. And so for me, it's kind of a benefit to actually speak to somebody who's coming from that perspective. We're fairly rare in the libertarian movement, um, and but I think we're absolutely critical because this is the wellspring of libertarianism. That self ownership. Each person have owning themselves. That we have no superior owner. If we did have a superior owner, we would be slaves. By what right would they have a superior ownership over themselves such that they could own someone else? Is this some sort of individual separate type of species? I think there's a big discussion around self-ownership, and I love taking from self-ownership to a whole bunch of other things. But what I'd like to talk to today is just about how self-ownership feeds into the Free State Project. um, and I'm going to assume that most of your people aren't really all that familiar with the Free State Project. Is that a safe assumption, Matthew?
Yeah, I mean, I'd heard of it, and fun enough, some of the people representing it didn't exactly sell me on it, if you like, because they weren't exactly espousing the most libertarian rhetoric. And then I think I made a criticism about something to do with them sort of not staying on the track of actually being libertarian or something like that. And another commentator who I had a kind of back and forth with basically recommended I speak to you because he said, well, look, there are people involved with this who are a little bit more on the case when it comes to understanding the principle and staying faithful to that. And you would do well not to kind of be put off this project by say one person or two people that you might hear who are associated with it, who don't seem to be the most libertarian people from a lot of the things you hear them say. So that was why when he first kind of sort of pointed me in your direction, and then the more I kind of read and obviously having a little bit of back and forth with you as well, the more enthusiastic I was to speak to you and learn more about this project. I'm very keen to know a lot of the kind of nuts and bolts elements, but I'm also very excited, as you kind of alluded to as well, to meet another person who focuses on the principle, because I know what you mean about the utilitarian thing. It's like a lot of people who kind of support the NAP, they do it because they think, well, the NAP would make sense, and from a utilitarian point of view, they kind of, that's their reason for it, and which is fine. But for my own self, and what I think is important, a lot of people also, like yourself, have the same understanding, is that it's the principle that this all comes from, and we need to understand that principle, or else we'll end up perhaps veering away from it and violating it. So yeah, and also because I kind of have a little bit of a kind of I don't know how best to describe it, almost like a philosophical loyalty to the principle, because from my perspective, it's a there's a kind of objective and undeniable nature to the concept of individual self-ownership. I often say morality itself is not objective, like you can't get an ought from it, is that whole saying, but you can get an ought from an is if you add a hypothetical imperative. And in this case, if we add the imperative that, like, say, for example, you could reject morality completely and just say might makes right, and I couldn't argue against you. But once you invoke the concept of morality, once you take that step, then self ownership reveals itself as the only coherent conceptualization of morality, rights, freedom, crime, law, all these elements that kind of tie to that. The only objective, universal, internally consistent concept is the concept of individual self-ownership, and then the principle that comes from that, the non-aggression principle. And from that element, it's kind of an objective form of morality, even though morality itself is not objective. It's kind of like, I don't know. Sorry, it's a bit of a fumbled way of explaining it, but basically what I'm saying is there's a kind of logical truth. That's what I wanted to say. Yeah, there's a logical truth to this that just makes it kind of that's what kind of gets me passionate about libertarianism. It's not the part of, I think the society would be better if we played it that way, although I do. But the fact of the matter is there's this kind of moral truth underneath it. And that's kind of what kind of drives me forward with regards to my own work and my own passion, you know, for this whole thing. And then obviously encountering someone like yourself who's so heavily involved in putting this into practice in kind of real, you know, tangible way excites me even more, which is why you know, like I say, this conversation is something I'm keen to have, and hopefully many more as well. So
Yeah, I want to say a little bit about the different types of libertarians we have here. So the Free State Project is kind of a short thumbnail, is a project where we're trying to concentrate libertarians into one small region, and there create a libertarian society. And this is premised on the idea that the one essential ingredient that you need for a liberty society is libertarians. That you can't do something where you go, oh, here's a whole bunch of authoritarians, let's take away government and we'll have a libertarian society. That doesn't work. You know, that's the whole, you know, go to Somalia and be and have live your libertarian paradise. Well, there are no libertarians in Somalia. So, so it's really hard to have a libertarian society without libertarians. So we kind of start from that premise that what we need are a lot of libertarians in one small region. We give up on the conceit that we can change the entire world, given that we are a teeny tiny little sliver of the population. And that most people are authoritarian or authoritarian leaning, and they're very happy about it. And that the freedom that we espouse is actually a very unpopular idea. It's unpopular with most people. They like their freedom for themselves. They don't particularly like freedoms for those people. And you know who I mean when I talk about those people. So what we do here is we do a gigantic concentration of libertarians into one small region. We're calling for people from all over the world, you know, from primarily from what I call the authoritarian 49. Those are the 49 other states that are not New Hampshire. And they're at various levels of authoritarians or different types of authoritarianism. But some of our best people are people who come from other countries. And they have to cross oceans to get to us. And so some of them are some of our most serious people. But the other thing that I wanted to just to mention is that because we're concentrating so many libertarians, we actually are concentrating probably the widest set of different types of libertarians. So people who are coming to libertarianism from different ways. And I often think of libertarianism as being a path. It's a practice. It's not like, you know, one day you wake up and you're all of a sudden you're libertarian. You're always working on it. I'm 43 years into this, Matthew. And so I'm been working on it fairly intensively for 43 years. And there's still things that I'm learning and studying and exploring, especially given how firmly authoritarianism was indoctrinated into us and how we're constantly bombarded with it outside. So I see this as a process, and therefore I'm probably more tolerant than a lot of new libertarians about the divergences in libertarianism. And I see them as different flavors, different foci, different different parts of a particular path. And so I'm actually one of the few people in the Free State Project that works with a lot of different groups. We have, I used to say we had over 100 groups, but I think we're more like 300 different groups. So very few people can work with a lot of those groups because they're different, different flavors, different focus. And I just have such an appreciation for anybody who's even, a little bit on this path, because I've been living amongst authoritarians in New York City and New Jersey and Chicago and Boulder, Colorado, and Boston, Massachusetts for so many years, and trying desperately to get them to understand questions like, I mean, one of my first openers is, do you believe that you own your own body? Just to find out where they are. And it's a tough life to be doing that decade after decade after decade. And so, when you finally get into a community of libertarians who will go, yeah, well, of course you do. Now, maybe they haven't taken that idea far enough down as you have, Matthew. But at least we're not talking about people starting down here. We're talking about people all starting up here. And it's such a relief. It's such a blessing to me at this late stage of my life, after slamming my head into the wall for so many years, to be in an environment where people have that unifying bottom line. I see libertarianism not as a something to live to. I think that we need other philosophies and other religions and other types of beliefs, other types of agreements to live to something. But I see it as the minimum bar that we must pass in order not to be evil. So I see it kind of, there's evil, which is, anything below self-ownership. If I start believing that I own someone and I can use violence in order to enslave them to my profit or my preferences, I'm operating in the evil side. But once you get to that level of self-ownership, now we can talk about other goods and moral. I differentiate between libertarian ethics, which is that minimum bar, and tribal morals. Things that different groups will think are really super important. And oh, you have to tip your hat, or you have to do this, or you have to do that. And you call them customs, you call them preferences or group preferences. But I see a big distinction between morals and ethics. And I think one of the biggest problems that authoritarianism gets into is it conflates tribal morals with universal ethics. But anyway, let me talk a little bit about where I come from and what the Free State Project is. I did want to just say that it's funny because people will come in and they'll meet a Free Stater, and for some reason they think that we're all the same. I'm going, you realize that this is like a libertarian individualist movement, and so we have so many varied people with different interests and different focus. You can find your tribe here. You can find your sub tribe here because we have so many libertarians. Out in the real world, out in the authoritarian world, in authoritarian 49, you find another libertarian, you're like so relieved. Oh, brother, oh my goodness. And you focus on the 98, 99% of the things that you agree on. Here we have enough that we can kind of segment and differentiate our different groups based on the 0.5% that we disagree on, and that's fine for me. I would rather live in a group that agrees 99%, and that we could be bickering about the 0.5, the 0.7 with this with 0.3. But living in the authoritarian world where I just see them doing evil every single day, that's what bothers me a lot. So my name is Dennis Pratt. I grew up in New York City. I grew up primarily as a leftist. I was a democratic socialist, so I'm in that 1/3 or 1/4 of libertarians that come from the left. Um, and I had an interesting transition that I won't go into. It's a fascinating story, but I derived libertarianism with a person who was kind of an arch conservative. I was an arch leftist, and we basically we were really concerned with being consistent, and we came to something after 9 months of a lot of intense work. We were working together at a startup 7 days a week, and we'd take breaks. Um, and we came to something that was consistent, and we agreed. And he had to give up on personal ownership and foreign interventionism. I had to give up on the economic interventionism. But we had something that seemed to work, and we were going, this, is this, are we done arguing? And I thought we had achieved something fantastic. I didn't realize that there was this gigantic history of this. This is back in the late 70s, early 80s. Um, and uh, um, and it took me about half a year before I found out that there was a name for this, and that there was a rich tradition called libertarianism. Um, but I thought, oh, geez, well, all I have to do is communicate this to other people, and they'll see the beauty. They'll see how fantastic it would be to live in consensual relationship, to not be abusing one another and violating one another, but to accept each person as they come. And if you don't like something, you avoid them. But otherwise, you're just leaving them be. And you know, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, 35 years later, I still wasn't able to do that. And it was just so frustrating. I talk a lot about the different strategies to achieve a a free society, and I've documented 25 or more different strategies that people have used libertarians have used over the decades, and most of these I've individually tried because I was desperate. I was why can't we actually get to this society where people are treating each other reasonably, rationally, ethically? With it must be my failure. For example, conversion, or maybe I need to be creating analogs, through innovation. And so I created these different organizations that were somewhat libertarian. Um, or maybe it's the third party, the libertarian party, or working with other parties, or becoming kind of a single issue power broker. So I've tried all of these. The Cato Institute strategy of supplicating and begging for our freedom, or telling our rulers, you can actually get a lot more out of your slaves if you give them a little bit of liberty. Camouflage strategy, working within a group and not really disclosing that you are there. And there's insulation and agorism, crypto, uh, uh, being on the internet and fighting with the authoritarians, and then there's a big category of strategies that is basically just kind of giving up. Just, oh my God, we'll never get there. And I was probably in a depression for about 5-6 years of just oh, this isn't going to work. I was trying analogs at that time, but it was just not it just didn't seem to be working. But there is a category of these strategies that does work to some extent, and those are separation strategies. And we are oftentimes strawmanned as, oh, you just want to live out in the woods by yourself. Well, that's one strategy. You can go out, live in the woods, and you're not being ruled by anybody, and you can live your own life. It's kind of tough. But then we also have things that are called freedom cells here in this country, where you have 6 to 8 to 12 people who do different functions, but those families form a cell, a kind of an autonomous cell, and they can help each other at times of emergencies and support each other, and then the cells can actually work together. What the Free State Project is a mass concentration strategy, and it's saying, okay, we can actually bring the libertarians who really, really, really want liberty all together in one place, and in that one place form a liberty society. And we're in year 21 now, um, of this strategy, and we've made just tremendous progress. We are the freest state in the United States, and we're the freest state in the United States with a bullet. So we are removing laws left and right. Now we have, in this country, hundreds of years of laws to remove, where the authoritarians are very busy coming up with this and that law. For example, we have full gun ownership. We don't even have laws against machine guns, state laws against machine guns. And we have constitutional carry, so you can carry anytime. You don't need any license to carry. You can go in and just buy a gun. There are some federal laws that we're still bound by, but interestingly, we also have a law that says that our state law enforcement will not enforce federal laws. So for the federal government, for DC to come in and enforce their laws, they have to do it. We're not going to supply them with any of our police or things like that to do that. So we did everything that we could in this one teeny tiny little area of the right to protect one's own body. Right, that's what gun laws are. The fight against gun laws is to be able to say, I own this piece of property. It is absolutely vital to my existence, and I must be able to protect it from damage or death. But just as an example of all the different laws, we found out, I think 2 years ago, that we had missed a law. There was a very specific law that you couldn't have a gun on a snowmobile. And it was a game and wildlife fish thing. And so this last year, we were like, let's get rid of the last law. And so now you can also have a gun on a snowmobile. But it's just amazing how the authoritarians insinuate themselves into every aspect of life here. I like to get, and we don't realize it, right? We don't understand the effect that they have on us. And I give an example. Late one night, in the legislature, we actually have a lot of people in the state house who are free staters or free stater adjacent, and they're busy removing laws. But late one night, one of them got a bill passed when most of the legislators were kind of asleep and not really paying attention, and it was basically to legalize beer manufacture. And we had kind of laws that were similar to other states, and the authoritarians kind of like, oh, let's just pass this and go home. And they didn't realize what would happen. Well, it exploded that industry. And all of a sudden, over 2 years, 3 years, we have 100 new types of restaurants and all these types of breweries and beer. And so you don't know what you are missing until you release that energy. And to me, libertarianism is almost it's kind of a mega entrepreneurship. It's a kind of self-actualization, right? So a lot of self-actualization is internal, that I need to stop my negative conversations and believe that I can do things. And we actually have one of our groups is working specifically on that area. But then how can you express yourself out in the world? And that's where libertarianism comes in, that other people shouldn't be able to tamp you down and hold you down and kind of crush you. So when that's released, all this potential beauty, potential innovation comes out, and you have no idea that it was there. You couldn't imagine it. And all of a sudden you go, oh my goodness. The trouble is, of course, is authoritarians don't realize it. They just think that that's natural, that was just a natural thing. They have no idea. That's all because there was a free stater. It was in the legislature who just basically got rid of one of your stupid laws, but we're doing this in so many different areas and seeing these incremental changes that are kind of popping up and then allowing a lot of blossoming and a lot of areas of expansion. Now, the Free State Project, I mentioned, it's a libertarian concentration, but we know that concentration works. This came out of a research that was happening by a man named Jason Sorens. He was doing research on secession movements and how they succeed and how they fail. That was his PhD program, and he was also a libertarian, looking at the libertarian efforts, and he was saying, we are getting nowhere. We're not actually succeeding. He made a prediction in 2002 that the Libertarian Party would be as feckless as it in 20 years, which was 2022, as it was in 2002. And the fact is, 2022 came and it was just about as worthless as it was in 2002. Now, I say that as a card-carrying member of the Libertarian Party for 42 years. It saddens me, but that's one strategy that has proven to fail. And so we don't need to do that over and over again. But we know that concentration works. We have in our country, we have Mormons who are a very small segment of the religious population, and they were getting violated by the other religions and laws passed against them, etc., until they did a mass migration to Utah. And there they got enough political power to be able to keep all the violators off of them. We also see it with groups like the Chinese, where they go and they'll take over a small part of a city, and they'll call that Chinatown. But in Chinatown, it's almost run by the Chinese, and it's Chinese. It's very Chinese. People go there in order to enjoy that type of culture, but it's a different culture. It's a different microcosm. We see that with gays. I think that there's a lot of analogy of libertarianism with gays. Trouble is that there's a lot more gays than there are libertarian. We had a debate at the Porcupine Freedom Festival, which is a festival that I ran for a number of years. I actually redesigned it to bring in a lot more different voices, a lot more different types of libertarians. But we had a debate there that it was easier to turn a heterosexual homosexual than it is to turn an authoritarian libertarian. And I actually believe that. I believe it's extraordinarily hard. Conversion just, we all converted, so I'm not saying it's zero, but it's extremely hard. And it requires certain characteristics that are not particularly widespread in the general population to escape the early full indoctrination into authoritarianism. But gays, what happens with gays? They pop up kind of oddly in towns, and they're usually alone. Maybe there's a few gays in that town that they can kind of connect with and stuff. But then they create their own cities, right? San Francisco, it's a gay city. And they control the laws, and people can't really mess with them. They can mess with them in when they're totally outnumbered in their local towns. Can't mess with them really in San Francisco. And of course, I mean, I hate to bring up this because of the terrible stuff that's happening over there, but Jews with Israel, same thing. Concentration allows much greater power. Now we're doing that concentration in this one area called New Hampshire. It's a small state. It's one of the smallest states. It has one of the largest legislative bodies, which is really good because what it means is each legislator represents about 3,200 people, 3,200 citizens. So you can actually go out there and meet all the people you're actually representing and talk to them. And that way it's accessible. The larger smaller that ratio becomes, how many representatives to the number of citizens, the less the individual citizens have impact on their representatives. The more cronies come in, and cronies who have interest, profit interest or preference interest to impose their will on the majority. And so what you actually see is in other states that don't have this gigantic, we have 400 reps for a state that's about 1.3, 1.4 million. So if when you see the representation where you have one rep per 200,000, all you're getting there is you're getting a guy who's controlled by the cronies. So we there's a lot of reasons why we chose New Hampshire, and we've had a lot of success. I think I'll just pause there. I'm sorry to have gone on for so intensely a time, but do you have any questions about that or?
Yeah, no, I mean, no apologies necessarily. That was all very interesting. I have got some questions. I mean, you touched on a few of them because I did want to ask actually about like because one of the things I was really keen to kind of question you about was like a lot of the specifics on like the things that you can do, the things that you are doing, and the things that you think that you can do that you're not yet doing but are still within possibilities. And one of the obvious things that came up, which you kind of touched on, was the federal versus state law issue. I mean, obviously, I'm in England, so I'm not an expert on all the ongoings in America, but I do remember, for example, when like states were legalizing cannabis or marijuana, as you call it over there, and there was issues with like federal government coming in to bust legal dispensaries that were legal within their states and stuff like that. Now, obviously, you did allude to one of the things you can do, which is instruct your own law enforcement not to enforce federal laws, so they don't have that aiding from you. So you did partially answer the question, but I wanted to give the question to you anyway with regards to, how does that, what sort of conflicts have come up? What sort of conflicts are going to come up do you foresee going forward? And what things have you done and what things can you do about it, other than obviously having laws where you don't at least enforce the federal laws within your state?
Yeah. Well, the United States was not considered an integral whole until fairly recently. It was always these United States, as in the states were autonomous, and they had turned over a very small part of their a rulership over to DC. Now, DC has accumulated more and more and more and more and more power over the states, but we do have that history of having the states be autonomous. That system is a system called federalism, where the states can rule inside, and a lot of our laws are actually internal laws, internal to the state. So we have a lot of control over there. The areas that we talk, I already mentioned guns, but agorism, so being able to trade without the government telling us how to trade or what to trade. Homesteading, we're really high on homesteading. We in terms of parental rights, we're really pushing back. A lot of the parental rights abuses come from the state, and so we're pushing back on those. We have homeschooling is an area that's really big here, and alternative schooling. And so, for example, one of the things that we did was that if you leave the government school, you can have up to $4,500 to use for whatever you want. That could be an alternative school. That could be a private school. That could be a Catholic school or another religious school. It doesn't matter. It could be homeschooling. So you'd have that return on your taxes to spend on whatever type of school that you want. Now that's as opposed to, I mean, they spend somewhere around $20,000 per student here. They kind of play games as to what's included in that and what's not included, and we don't include the building because that's a capital cost, and all this type of accounting tricks that would never work in private industry. But the return to the taxpayers of this program is just going to be phenomenal. Where we're going to be cutting the expenditures by a quarter, and giving parents and families and children much more tailored education. So the one size fits few government indoctrination institutional camps, will give way to much varied types of schooling. Now, some of those, I would say are terrible schools. Others are going to be fantastic schools. But I went through 10 different educational programs. Only two of them really fit me. Um, and so, I think it's hard to match a child to a particular education program. And I think it's impossible to have one educational program for, for, 500,000 children. I think that's just insane to try to do. So that's an area, I don't know if you've been hearing, but there's been a big debate about whether we get rid of the Washington, D.C. Education department, which somehow they snuck in a few decades ago and has been getting more and more power. And yeah, why aren't the states entirely taking control of their own state education? And then here in New Hampshire, we would devolve that down to the families, and to the teachers, allowing all different teachers to come up with different types of schooling models, and the parents picking and choosing what they want. And then, this doesn't work. Well, I'm moving my child over to this school this week. I don't have to go to a parent teacher conference. I just don't like your school. All right. So it's that quick and easy to do. We're number one in crypto in the US. We're number one in metal trading in the US. And now we've seen the federal government come in and come after some of our crypto people, for example, because we are at that very point of the spear in terms of these things. We're seeing them create novel law and apply it first to New Hampshire people. So we had a big cases here that, of course, we lost because they're going against the federal government. But we lost. Somebody was selling crypto and tripped over some sort of 1933 law and all this type of stuff. And they said that because somebody had used the crypto for some sort of nefarious thing, that therefore the person who sold them the crypto was in jeopardy, although that's not a standard that we use with Western Union or banks or Amazon gift cards or anything like that, right? So if you get scammed by buying an Amazon gift card, it's not Amazon doesn't get blamed for having been part of that, but here they were applying that in order to get the crypto people. And then we also have had a library. I don't know if you know library, and Odyssey, which is Odyssey is a YouTube competitor, but the entrepreneur who started those was brought up on SEC charges. And again, it was some old law in 1933 that they came up with a new interpretation that they would never explain to him, and he kept on sending lawyers to say, how can we do this? And the answer was, we're not going to tell you. We'll just come in 5 years, 7 years later and destroy your business, because we'll then say that you violated this law, because we'll just come up with a new interpretation. So DC is still a problem. I want you to know that that's still a problem. But so much of our enslavement is at the local level and at the state level here. And we can get rid of so many things that are holding people down. That we don't have income tax here. We don't have sales tax here. So now we have to pay federal taxes.
Yeah.
Right. But then, one of the things that we're talking about is, okay, how do we get out of that? Right. I'm running Liberty Forum, New Hampshire Liberty Forum, which is, it's more of, I ran Pork Fest, which is kind of more of an outdoor festival. It's a week-long outdoor festival in a simulated Liberty Village. And New Hampshire Liberty Forum is more of a conventional, it's more of a convention where people go, and some people dress up. I don't, but some people will dress up and look all official and stuff. But there'll be presentations. What we're doing there, though, is we're having different people, different presenters come and talk about emerging liberty for real societies. Free State Project probably being the furthest one along. Okay. So we're kind of the granddaddy of them all, but there are another 20 or so. Actually, there's more like 30. I counted them yesterday. I think there's 33 if you count some of the failures as kind of learning experiences. But there's a lot of these little teeny tiny attempts to create liberty for real societies. Basically concentration. How do we concentrate this and get these things going? And what are the obstacles that they're facing? And how, what are ways to get around it? So I call this idea, this New Hampshire Liberty Forum, a hacker space for liberty for real societies, where you're going to get, this group is having this type of problem. Well, let's get together. So they'll do a little presentation about what the problem is, what the set of solutions are, and what they think that a path through that might be. And then we're going to do brainstorming sessions, right? So that people who are interested in that will do brainstorming sessions on that. So it's a really exciting. I have to tell you, it's for a nerd like me, this is so much fun. It's so much more fun than going around saying, do you think you own your own body? Well, do you realize that if you don't own your own body, that means you're a slave, that someone else owns you? Yeah, I know you were told, and just doing that endlessly, and then watching the people just not be able to break through in that area. Here we're kind of, we're well past that area, and now we're talking about how to actually implement liberty. And so if you're at all serious about liberty, if you really do want to live in a liberty for real society, I tell everybody, you've got to come here and help us prototype this. And we have so many open questions. There's so many areas to build. And you can come in and help with any of the 300 different groups that are doing different things. And a lot of them are not particularly political, Matthew. What a lot of people do is they come here thinking, oh, I'm coming here because the laws are lessening and we're moving in the freedoms thing. What they don't realize is the community aspect of it. First of all, there's a physical feeling. When I'm in New Hampshire, I didn't realize that when I was in the authoritarian world, I had a pressure in my chest at all times because I felt totally surrounded, that nobody was understanding me. I was the weird one, right? I was the weird one who favored peace, love, and understanding, right? I'm weird for that. And I had to defend it all the time. And people would just like kind of nonchalantly say like these stuff that they were going to do evil stuff to people. I'd be like, no, and I just be like, just constantly worried. And here I'm just so much more relaxed. And it's funny, what's one of the things that happens to people who join the Free State Project and move to New Hampshire is after a while, we don't like crossing the border. Now, I lived in, I don't know, 6 states, 7 states, and I've never really thought of those borders as being really important. New Hampshire's border for a libertarian is so important. It's so important. We have people who will drive extra miles and extra ways not to slip down into Massachusetts. And for me, my wife has to actually, kind of prepare me. We're going to be visiting your daughter, so we're going to be leaving there. And I have to kind of work through the anxiety. I'm going into the authoritarian 49. I don't want to do that. I lived most of my life there. I'm finally in a place where I feel like I'm making progress, where I'm amongst people who understand this ethic, who live by the ethic, and they're actually trying to figure out, how do we implement this? In this one particular area. Oh, geez, that's not working. What about this? What about this? What about that? Right? We have so many thousands of those questions facing us. And if you're a problem solver, if you're kind of somebody who likes to think through these things or work through these things, it's so much fun. If you're an implementer, you can just tie into one of these groups and help them advance. But what's beautiful about this is that, as opposed to here in the United States, the Libertarian Party, where we see, thousands of people working endlessly on what I believe to be an impossible strategy, right? A strategy of what, converting everybody to libertarianism when we're like, 1 or 2% of the population now, and and very unpopular, or that we're going to camouflage our way in there, pretend like we're authoritarians, or we're just kind of liberty light, and then transform everybody. And it's just like you know it's just not going to happen. So anyway, I worry about the people who are out and stuck in the authoritarian world, and who do have this drive for liberty. And I tell people, look, before you get super depressed, before you think that there's no chance, understand that there's a place where we're building liberty. Come and visit us. When people come, I tell them, contact me before you even come, because I'll give you discounts at the inn that we own. I'll tell you, I'll send you out each day, go out in different directions, and you can join this porcupine group and this porcupine group, and talk to different people, and find, we'll find, oh, you're interested in this. Well, here's this group that's doing that, and we'll put you in touch with them. And then you can enjoy each night the community aspect. We have 7 libertarian community centers in New Hampshire. 7. How many community centers do you have in England, all of England?
Ah, well, libertarian ones.
Yeah, libertarian ones.
None.
We have 7. We
None,
have
as far as I'm aware.
I know. And that's the power that you have of concentration. Because it's like, oh geez, we want to get together and do this. Well, we need a clubhouse, and now all of a sudden we're having dances and music. So this last weekend we had people from the North Country up in the mountains. They came down, and they had a band, and they played at the community center that I actually started, but it's only 15 minutes from here. And so our people came in, and their people were in there, and it was just a lot of fun playing kind of this fun acoustical band violin music in the clubhouse. So we have debates, we have discussions, we watch videos. Now we actually have groups here who are dedicated to our end. They hate us. We call them free haters. So we're the free staters, they're the free haters, right? And they're actually so shocked that we're here and we're actually making progress. So they actually organize and talk about how horrible liberty is and how terrible libertarianism is. And look at what these libertarians are doing. Oh my God. And they will send out postcards and say, beware of these people. And they show like a wolf in sheep clothing, and they're all around, and they'll have protests out in the street. How many times do people protest libertarianism in England?
Well, they don't.
Because you're ineffective, right? You don't have the concentration. Here, we're so effective that the authoritarians are saying, you're cutting into my profits. You're cutting into my preferences that I want to impose through the violence of the state on others. You are making my life very hard for what I want to do, which is domination, subjugation of these other people, right? Because we're saying, don't subjugate. We're against that. And they're going, well, I got to end you. So we actually get we had this one situation where so a lot of us are nerds, okay? And one of the towns, we had free staters who were in fairly high levels of the town, on the school board and the selectmen, so kind of leaders of the town. And one of the guys who's one of the selectmen, he came in and they were doing the school budget, and he said, look, right now we're paying $21,000 per student to put them into our local school. And they want an additional 3% increase in that. But why 3%? Look at the private schools. The most expensive private school, if we were just to take those kids and send it to the most expensive private school, would cost us $10,000. But most of the schools are $9,000. But most of the schools are a lot less than that. But let's say that our government school is the most expensive school, and we'll even give them another $1,000, so 12% more because they're sloppy or something like that. So let's set the budget at $10,000 per student and say, if you can't do that, well, then you're incompetent. And there weren't a lot of people there. People don't really go to these town meetings that much. But usually the unions take advantage of that, right? And they vote, more money for more teachers because we really care about the teachers as opposed to the kids and the families and the taxpayers. And so what happened was they actually passed the budget at $10,000 per student. And you should have heard the caterwauling, Matthew. And we had millions of dollars of union money, teacher union money, flood into for this just one town to counteract this. Now, the school was dropping its budget by more than half. But it turned out that that's a large part of the property taxes. So the property taxes were dropping by 60%. So can you imagine that your property taxes is reduced by 60%? Now, of course, they had all the advertising and union people and oh, don't you care about your local teacher? And so they fought. They ran it back. They got their 3%, and so the budget is back up to, I don't know, $22,000, something ridiculous. But I have to tell you, all the other towns are looking at that going, okay, now what was the property tax after that? And and we're all kind of going, all right, we had our first entry. What else can we do here? So and so we have these like different things happening that are always so exciting to the people who understand the utilitarian and the ethical argument for libertarianism. The general people here may not understand. They tend to be more of a hardy New England, leave us alone type of thing. So they don't really particularly like government particularly well. But then we also have this influx of all these kind of leftist authoritarians coming in who love government, and they want New Hampshire to be just like authoritarian Massachusetts or authoritarian Vermont. But so this battle is ongoing, and they see us as a real threat, as an effective threat. And so I think that people just don't realize what it's like to be a libertarian and to be effective for liberty. And you can do that. Or what it's like to be libertarian and to be in a libertarian community. One of my greatest regrets was I raised my daughter in the authoritarian 49. So I raised my daughter in Massachusetts. Now we homeschooled, and we were pioneers in homeschool. And we had to fight our town about homeschooling because our town had very good schools, right? The one size fit all, and didn't necessarily fit everyone. And plus, we don't really believe that government indoctrinating children is the right way of that. That's not really education. That's just indoctrination. But so we homeschooled our child, but still the whole environment that we were in was authoritarian. We were still the only libertarians in our town. And most of the people that we homeschooled with weren't necessarily libertarian. They were more like kind of crunchy granola progressives, or they were fundamentalist religious types, which aren't our people. Here, you could actually school your child with other libertarian families. And it's just like, I wish I could have done that. I wish I could have done that, because my daughter grew up totally fearful that her other students would find out that her family was libertarian, right? Because we're the weird ones in the authoritarian world. Here, we're not the weird ones. Here, we are changing the culture and changing the discussion about how much more freedom should we be adding. So it's really an exciting place and an exciting time. I'm sorry. So go ahead with any other questions you have about that.
Well, I mean, to be honest, that's really inspiring stuff. I mean, the the thing I like about it is the real examples that you can then provide. Because we can have the philosophical discussion with people, but when you can show examples of actual, we did this and this was the result. Like with the example of, well, we reduced. I mean, and the result is like with the schooling, you're paying less for your child's education and you're paying less taxes. It's like, you know what I
And
mean?
it's more effective. It's more
Yeah,
effective for your child,
because that's
right?
often a common barrier, I think, when you're talking to people about libertarian principles and applying it to the real world, is there's a kind of skepticism, I think, almost indoctrinated into them. Like, it's like that how will you pay for the roads without taxes kind of thing, but that kind of spreads out into everything. And one of the things that I found very inspiring listening to you talk about what you're doing in New Hampshire is the fact that you're able to overcome that by actually like show, like, well, this is what we did and this was the result, and the results kind of speak for them. It's empirical rather than just philosophical. You know what I mean? It's actually showing results. So that, I know that's not a question, that's just more, but I just wanted to make that comment because that was very inspiring listening to a lot of that. I mean, the education thing, I couldn't agree more. It's horses for courses. There's that phrase, I don't know if it is actually Albert Einstein, but I think that was who it was attributed when I read it, or a quote about if you judge a fish by its ability to climb a tree, it will live its life as a failure. And that sums,
Exactly.
yeah, and that sums up
Exactly.
the issue with the education, because that's exactly it. I mean, I always used to use myself and my brother as perfect examples. He's my half brother, and we're very different people. I'm kind of artistic, musical, and that kind of thing. He's a mechanic. He's not particularly kind of intellectual, but he's very clever when it comes to building things and that kind of thing. You know what I mean? So, and the problem is we both went through the same torture through the public education system, but in different ways. He was tortured by sitting through lessons that he couldn't understand because he was dyslexic and struggled with, but also that bored him out of his mind and was wasting his time when he could have been spending more time on, like, say, he'd have like a rare opportunity to do something that did interest him, like sports or shop work or something like that, and then he'd be in his element. And you just think, well, obviously there's a certain kind of universality to education with regards to we all need to read and write, we all need to kind of add up and stuff like that. So you want everyone to have a certain kind of basic commonality, but beyond that, you want the artists to explore their art, and you want the mathematicians to expand their mathematical ability, and you want the builders to get better at, but you want people to flourish at what they're truly talented at doing. And we are all different, and um, our value lies in different places. And the problem with the education system is that standardization. They want to make everybody the same, and it just doesn't work. And the examples that you're giving, I mean, obviously, like I say, there's those tangible kind of numbers that you can give of, like, this is what we reduced with regards to the cost of education, this is what we reduced with regards to your tax. But then there's also something that doesn't show up in the data, which is the fact that the quality of the education that you're giving them, because it's tailored more for them, and it's not about standardization. So, excuse me, it's not about standardization, it's not about indoctrination, it's about what education in theory is supposed to be about, which is about, helping people realize their kind of potential. So that's really inspiring, and just kind of makes me almost, well, makes me want to move to New Hampshire, to be perfectly honest.
Well, come out and visit. Come out and visit. We actually have one of our people here who's, like I said, the people who come from overseas, who travel really far, they're very serious. The people who hop over a border to come to New Hampshire, you have to see how serious they are. Some of them are not, they may not be as tough, but the people who come from, we have one woman who's running right now for Washington D.C. House of Representatives, and she has a good shot of actually winning. As she's doing a really good fight, but she came from China, from communist China. And do you think that, increasing authoritarianism it sits well with her? No. she gets so upset. But one of the people who lives not too far from me here, is German, and uh, and he has been relentless in bringing Germans over here, having them stay. And it's funny because they spend more and more time. And one of them came, one of their documentarians came in and did a great 15-minute documentary of Porkfest and going around and interviewing all the different people and talking to them about what was happening in New Hampshire and why libertarianism was so important to actually prototype and actually build and show and work through all these difficult problems that, so we have to build a prototype. We have to do that. And that's what we're doing here. And so it's just so much fun watching Lucas and bringing in more and more people. And what he does is he'll get an article into some, I guess there's a libertarian paper, a magazine in Germany. And so he'll get a couple of articles in there, and then he'll find somebody. He'll get them to come over here, and the person will stay a week, and before long, they're spending 3 weeks or 4 weeks, and they'll bring their friend over next time. And so I really like to see that. I think, as depressing as it is being a libertarian in the authoritarian 49 of the US, I think it's much more depressing being a libertarian in places like England and Germany. And then there's even worse places to be a libertarian. And so I see us as precious resources, as precious things that, mostly are being thrown, it's a seed, and it's being mostly thrown on asphalt where it cannot grow. And I'm going, there's this fertile field here. We need you here. So I invite people to come out for, what I call a porcupine vacation. I give discounts at the inn. Like I said, you go off every single day. You go off in a different direction. You meet different porcupines. You meet with different groups. The New Hampshire Liberty Forum is April 23rd through the 27th. Go to nhlibertyforum.com, nhlibertyforum.com. You can come to that and be part of our brainstorming session. But personally, I think that it's actually better to come here just during a regular week. Maybe come for the Liberty Forum and then stay a week after. But I think it's good to come for just a regular week, because you can then act as though you're a porcupine. That's what we call ourselves, porcupines out here. And just see what it's like to be in a place where people are building liberty, and that, you can find your own group. And so, I'm sorry that you bumped into people whom you disagree with. There are other libertarian people who agree with those people, but we have so many people here that it's going to be people that you do agree with, and then you find your own group. And if you can't find your own group, we're hoping that you are entrepreneurial enough that you'll just create your own group for the people who are like you, who are looking for those types of people. It's funny to see all the different types of libertarians. Of course, when you're isolated, surrounded by all authoritarians, you don't see many libertarians at all. The ones that you see very briefly. But then now to live with them and see, the tribal differences are real, and different people will actually want to live differently. And that's good. We want that. We need that. And what I'm seeing here is, are you familiar with Hans Hermann Hoppe?
Yeah.
Yeah. So he has this idea of 1,000 Liechtensteins, of different communities that are kind of covenant communities. I'm actually seeing that start to form here, where we have, these people are gravitating, and it's not just virtual, but they're actually starting to live together. And this group doesn't particularly like this group, and they're not going to get together on a lot of things. Now, they share that bottom line ethic, but they don't want to live like each other, and so that's fine. They don't have to live like each other. And we actually have enough libertarians here that you can have cultural differences and you can have preference differences, and you can have your own kind of community rules. Well, in this community, we don't do that. And if you do that, you can't be in our community. We're going to ostracize you in our community. But we have enough communities that you can find your community. So it's fun to see, and it's fun to watch voluntary communities forming around different tribal preferences, cultural preferences, whatever you want to call those. I call them morals, but yeah.
Yeah, no, I understand. I mean, fun enough, I mean, remember you mentioning like what your distinction between ethics and morals. And I have the same distinction. I just use different language. I always called it objective morality versus subjective morality. So I kind of called it all morality, but I understand. I think we're making the exact same distinction, just using slightly different language to do it.
And my terms, I searched desperately for the right terms in those, Matthew, and I had to settle on those terms as, the ethical being the universal, which, and more objective, and the morals being more the personal or the tribal or the customs, subjective. And it's absolutely an important distinction, because so many people, they want to be moral. They don't know what moral means. So they look to the tribe and they go, what's moral? Oh, you have to do this. Don't kill anybody and tip at least 20%. Well, those are not the same things, guys. But somehow they, oh, how dare you trip only, and I think, I mean, I don't know what's going to happen. I don't even know what's going to happen in New Hampshire. I know that New Hampshire is the most exciting thing for a libertarian. It's like this is where liberty's actually happening. And if you're a libertarian and not being here, what the heck are you doing? 500 years from now, they're going to be looking. Well, this happened in New Hampshire, and here's what happened. Here's the blossoming of that liberty. So this is the place to be. This is the center of the liberty movement, for real, right? The liberty for real movement, not the liberty in your head, not the liberty in the armchair, not the liberty. Oh, let's try to pretend that we're going to reform Washington D.C., which you can't do. But the liberty for real thing. Anyway, I got way sidetracked. What was I talking about? Oh, I was making a distinction between ethics and morals.
Yeah.
And what was I going for? I'm sorry, I lost it. You'll have to excuse me.
That's right. It happens to me all the time. And often when I'm mid-sentence and mid-thought, my brain does a little wipe.
Well, it really is exciting. I hope that you get the sense of excitement. I think it's more exciting for me. I was telling someone the other day that almost everyone I know who's libertarian 43 years ago gave up or died. It's just too long. It's just too frustrating. It's too long. It's too hard to maintain that in the face of overwhelming odds of being, disparaged and mocked, and your family and all this type of stuff. Well, I have to tell you, being in this environment, oh my God, what a relief it is to me. The newer libertarians, they come in and they think that this is normal. I'm going, no, this is normal. You have no idea how bad it could be. I'm so happy that I lived long enough to be able to catch the beginning of this thing, and to make real contributions to it. I feel as though it's a major part of my life lived well. If I had been on my deathbed and I had only lived in the authoritarian 49, and I had done everything I could but failed all the time, there would be a great sadness there, because liberty means a lot to me. I want to see humans flourish. I want to see individuals be all they can be. I want the best Matthew, and I want the best Dennis, and the best Carol. I want all these people to be the best they can be, and actually express themselves out in the world. That's what drives me. That's what excites me. And if I had died, and I'd done what I'd done. I was very active in the authoritarian 49, and I've written almost 2,000 essays, and a lot of people uh, say that I've converted them to libertarianism, but it was just it was a drop in the bucket. It was nothing. And now I'm like going, oh man, boy, I'm leaving a legacy here. I'm leaving a legacy here. I'm leaving a legacy here. And you know what's fantastic, Matthew, is you're going to be working on this area, or it might be building community, it might be in crypto or guns, it might be getting office, or it could be anything like that. It could be music, right? Liberty Musicians Group. Whatever it is, you're going to be working there, and then you're going to look up and you're going to see, oh, all these other people here, they've all been working at the same time, and so everyone's advanced. So you've advanced here, everyone else is advanced, and so you're kind of in a liberty army. You're not working alone. It's not you by your lonesome. It's you and people working by your side, advancing liberty together. It's very exciting.
It's inspiring. I sincerely mean that. It's been inspiring listening to you describe this. Um, I'll be honest with you. I've like when you talk about the difference between being a tangible libertarian doer and doing these actual things, and then obviously like what you were doing before with the philosophical and persuading people and all the rest of it. Now I'm very much in that second category. That's kind of what I'm doing. I haven't got any immediate plans to create a New Hampshire style place in England, and I'm not even sure I'd know where to begin. But so I think basically this conversation has made me very interested in the Free State Project, and made me inspired by it and what you're doing. And I think it's very important. I myself wouldn't give up on the other part. Like what you talk about, the perhaps feels very much like wasted years in comparison to the more tangible work you're doing now. And I totally get that. And I probably would feel the same in your situation. But I don't think that what you were doing before was completely worthless. And I don't think it is, carrying on, because obviously we can't all move to New Hampshire, and we can't all create exactly what you're creating as
I know what you're talking about. You have to get into those leaky wooden ships, and it's like 2 months on the high seas with 2/3 of the ship sinking, and then you wind up and you go to a place and there's nothing there except like Indians that are trying to kill you. Oh man, and you starve to death? No, it's not. Oh wait, you don't have to do that anymore. You could just get over here. Our proto libertarians left England. You may have the genes of one of those proto libertarians who just didn't leave. So it might be your turn, Matthew. Might be your turn.
It might be. I guess what I'm saying is I believe in a multi-pronged approach to the liberty movement, and you've convinced me that what you're doing is a vital part of that. But you haven't convinced me to abandon the other part. Not that I'm saying that you're not trying to necessarily, but just from like basically 99.9% of what you've been saying, I've been nodding in agreement and have agreed with. And the only time I've had a little bit of pushback was when you said that everybody, like most people are authoritarian, or most people are that. And maybe I'm naive, and maybe I've just not had as many decades of failing to do this as you had with regards to that aspect of it. But I still believe that most people are libertarian deep down. I still think that there is a way to kind of trigger that. The reason why I feel that way, and this is not an argument against what you're doing, because what you're doing is, it's real tangible stuff. It's not just, philosophical conversations which can go nowhere. But just like in my own life, I often talk to people just in general, and I've yet to encounter somebody who's actually, when I've had the conversation with them, when I've gone through it, who've actually stood by their authoritarianism. Like most people are kind of just passively going along with whatever. if you created a free society, if I could click my fingers and create, perhaps my nation's of sanity's idea of a free society tomorrow, most people just go along with it because it's how it is. You know what I mean? It's like I think they would go along just like they're just going along with the authoritarianism. They'd go along with the freedom, but I think they go along a little bit better with the free society. I think it would, because the thing is, a lot of this resonates with people. I mean, you mentioned like different groups that have like their own kind of agendas and like, but a lot of these different groups, they've got a kind of fundamental kind of like belief underneath it that's attached to the self concept of self ownership that they may not be kind of aware of. I mean, I know you've probably had these kind of conversations with so many people, so it's probably an unimpressive point, but it's like it's like when people were trying to abolish slavery, for example. It was the same. I suppose that's the kind of thing. It's like there was a time when the idea of abolishing slavery was kind of fantastical or whatever. And I just feel like, well, it happened to a certain degree in a certain kind of way. And I just feel like, well, I haven't given up on the idea of a kind of revolution where we abolish all NAP violations, where we kind of I haven't given up on that, and I'm not, like I say, I'm not saying that as an argument against what you're doing with the Free State Project, because you've 100% convinced me that this is important work that, and anyone who can move to New Hampshire should. And I think people should also look at seeing if they can create something like this anywhere else where it's viable. But the fact of the matter is like I've been trying to connect with obviously like other libertarian thinkers. I was talking to a guy, I don't know if you know him. He's a libertarian in Nigeria he goes by the name Econ Bro. I don't know if you're familiar with him, but he's out in Nigeria doing libertarian work. He goes around to colleges and universities and schools and just community centers and stuff like that.
Shoot. Yeah, I saw some of his work, and that was really impressive. He was trying to teach that kind of self-ownership to a class. I only saw one little brief thing about it, and I remember sending him something. Go, boy, you did a good day's work. he should come to New Hampshire. He'd be doing it because I mean, I'm sorry. Go ahead, please.
No. All I was going to say is like that's an example of somebody. I mean, maybe he can move to New Hampshire, and maybe he should, but at the same time, that's somebody who's living in. I mean, let's put it this way. From what he's told me about Nigeria, it would be very difficult to create a New Hampshire there for lots of reasons, mostly to do with the government. And maybe he could move to New Hampshire, and maybe that would be a good thing to do. And, certainly would be for him. And I'm sure it would be for New Hampshire to have another person like him there. So it is win-win-win-win. But like I say, and I'm not discouraging that, but I feel like it's like we should still also do, even if it's pie in the sky stuff, it's kind of like, it's almost like, it's a bad example because I don't even do the lottery, but it's almost like I work my 9 to 5 to pay my bills and do the things that I've got to do, but I also buy a lottery ticket. As unlikely as it is now, actually don't do that, so it's a bad example, but let's say
it's a perfect example. It's a perfect example. You're losing money every time you buy a lottery ticket. Yes, every once in a while you'll win something, but on the whole, you're losing. And we are playing probabilistic games, right? That's the truth of it. So what happens, am I right or am I wrong? That's an empirical matter to be seen. All I can tell you is I've been working this thing with an intensity that few people have for 43 years. I've seen other people do it. People come to libertarianism. They think that this is brand new. I'll go, do you not realize how many hundreds of thousands of people have been working on this? How many trillions of discussions they've had? People go, oh, all we need to do is do this. I go, you don't think people have tried that? Anyway, I do have a couple things to say to you.
Yeah. Cool.
First of all, the New Hampshire Free State Project is premised on there being a large group of what I call flotsam. They're not authoritarian to the extent that they really believe, and they're not the psychopathic authoritarian, right? But if the general culture is authoritarian, the flotsam's going to move with the authoritarian. What we're trying to do with concentration is get enough libertarians that all of a sudden the general move is towards liberty. And guess what the flotsam does? It starts moving there. Now, this group here, the hardcore the psychopathic authoritarians, we actually have a program that we offer to buy them out, help them pack up, pay for their move, pay their first month's rent in whatever state they want to move to. So we're trying to get rid of those people because those people are dedicated to the enslavement of everyone else, right? So the flotsam will actually move in a liberty. Now, of course they're gonna be biased, and they're gonna be saying all this crazy. Well, we need a law for that, and but you need a strong enough culture developed. There we go. Well, of course we would never do that, right? That's not what we do here in New Hampshire. If you want to do that, go to Massachusetts. If you want to do that, go to New York. If you want to do that, go to California. If you want to do that, go to Texas. If you want to do that, go to Florida. So, there's 49 other states that you can go and do that. We don't do that in New Hampshire. That's not us. Live free or die. That's our motto for New Hampshire. So yes, I agree with you that most people are flotsam, that you can talk to them and, being personable, being educated, being intelligent, you can kind of convince them. Next week, if they talk to an authoritarian, they're going to be convinced the other way. They are variable. And the secret here is we don't need 51% libertarians. We need enough to be moving that flotsam in our direction. So we need either bring in this many or bring in fewer and get rid of these guys. The second thing I wanted to say is I always get a kick out of libertarians who say, well, I'm like this. I converted and I see this, and I think, people really will be. And I say, have you in your life ever been mistaken as a normal, average Joe person? Have you, Matthew? Do people say, oh, that Matthew, he's just typical of everyone else?
No, I understand what you're saying.
None of us have. We have always been the weird ones. And now all of a sudden we go, I'm just going to project from myself. Project from yourself. You have a lifetime of knowledge to know you are not like them, right? So stop it. They are different. I have, my background is marketing strategy. I studied that at MIT, and then I also did research on that and was part of an incubator at a research lab. At a design, and I utilized it to how to design new products in emerging industries. But a lot of this is, okay, what are we looking for? So, I've been in that proselytizing conversion business so long enough that I actually have like a little, here are the characteristics that I'm looking for. So let me go over some of them with you. These are the characteristics of somebody who would be really good to spend your time to convert. Okay. First one, they have to be intellectually curious. So they think, they're looking for new ways to make sense of the politics. They're not the people who say, oh, I understand how politics works already. They're logically consistent. They care about being consistent. As a matter of fact, if they're inconsistent, they're going to spend the night not being able to sleep, trying to work through the inconsistency. Whereas, the other people are, oh yeah, well, consistency is a hobgoblin of small minds and that type of. They have an internal locus of control. Okay. So they believe that outcomes of humans are largely due to their efforts, and they can affect their lives. They're principled. They believe that the principles matter, and that they need to understand what's true, the ethics, that matters, and then they live their lives to that. They're courageous. They're not going to be scared of what other people are thinking. They're actually going to go ahead and do it, regardless of what friends and family might think. They're independent. And I'll just go over some of the other ones. Tolerance, high tolerance, visionary, authentic, autonomous, willing to change their mind. They have strong boundaries already. They're epistemically humble. Now, you put all those things together and you get the intersection, and that's the ideal candidate. Okay? Those are rare characteristics. Each one of those is rare. And the general population just doesn't have those. So now I think it's great if you can find somebody who has a lot of those characteristics, work with them, because that's a person, that's a high, that's a high qualified candidate for conversion. If you meet somebody who's very low on those characteristics, save your breath. Spend your time helping the Free State Project, or doing something that actually has a chance in hell of working, because you're wasting your life doing that. So anyway, that's my my thing, that we do count on the flotsam. The heavy authoritarians, they're not changeable. Most of the flotsam isn't. There are some people who have those characteristics for conversion, and that we need them. But the trouble is that intersection of those characteristics to be able to escape the authoritarian upbringing, it's so rare that what we're doing here in the Free State is saying, we don't really care how you came to it. If you came to it, and wherever you are on that path of understanding libertarianism, come here and let's concentrate together and build it together and show for real. And I have to tell you, the flotsam is much more interested in real than they are in theoretical constructs. That's another characteristics, right? You and I are very theoretical. We can think in these types of terms. I don't think they can. So, but if they see a society that's functioning and is really being successful, now all of a sudden they're much more attracted. So I think we have to actually build the prototype. I think the time for yapping is over. We've already found a lot of the people who can convert. Yeah, if you can find some more, find them. But before you stick them on impossible tasks, tell them that there's a place where, their efforts, whatever their effort is. So let's say that they can spend 10% of their life on liberty stuff, right? You want that 10% to be as effective as it can possibly be. You don't want that 10% to basically produce, 0.001% result. You want that 10% to produce 6% result, 7% result. And that's what we have here. We have a hotbed here where you can actually work. Will all your efforts go to fruition? No, of course not. This is still human endeavors and stuff. And we don't know how to do a lot of these things. But you have an army behind you. You have a culture. You're working with people who are not down here. You're working with people who are already here. And now you can start from there. So, and you're not spending all your time going from here to here. You're spending your time from here to here, and here to who knows where. You're not going to get to here by starting here. You might get to there by starting here. Anyway, that's what I have to say about that.
Yeah, no, the good points, well made, and difficult to argue against, to be honest, because a lot of the proof is in the pudding with what you're doing. So, there is that. And yeah, I mean, a lot of what you're saying is true. There's still a part of me that wants to push back a little bit on it. This isn't just because I'm holding on to my Nations of Sanity project, which is obviously kind of built on that strategy. But just, I suppose where it's coming from a little bit is I use the example of abolishing slavery. Like I look at the flotsam, as you call them, and most of them would have supported slavery when slavery was a common thing. And after it's abolished, then it becomes the cultural norm to understand it as a crime. They're all anti-slavery, So, I kind of, I kind of see that, but the kind of the flip side of that to me is if you can do it with slavery, you can do it with self ownership as a whole. And although the Flotsam would just as happily go along with slavery, or maybe not just as happily, but they would have gone along with slavery when it was happening, and then they go along with being against it when, you know, that's the when we all understand that it's a crime. But back in the days when it was, they wouldn't have been able to justify it. Whereas today, now that they're anti-slavery, without going into deep intellectual levels, they would be able to justify it. You know, it might not have been something they would have championed, you know, in a society where it wasn't the norm, but it is something that they can understand once it has been accepted on that kind of societal level. So I don't think it's beyond the kind of the flotsams, as you call them, the sheep kind of people, you know, the people that aren't just thinking that deeply about it, they're just going along with it. I don't think it's beyond them. Um, so I don't want to give up on that fully, but I do take your point. I mean, that's the thing. I do take your point with all of the arguments you've given for why you're like, look, abandon that and join the Free State Project, come to New Hampshire, because that does also make sense. And everything you're saying about concentrating people and creating that society. I mean, as you were talking about it, I wished I lived there. I was thinking about all the ways in which my local government fucks with my life. And I was thinking, oh, wouldn't it be great? The education, all of these things. It would be lovely to live around other libertarians. Um, so, like I say, I'm not poo-pooing what you're doing at all when I say this, but I just don't want to let go of that other prong. I don't want to let go of, like I say, this whole and the other thing, like with my Nation's Insanity Project idea, this whole kind of idea of let's make the NAP the law, you know, through a peace agreement, saying that crime can and should be defined by the concept of individual self-ownership. For me, that serves two purposes. For one, it's about creating a North Star. So even a project like New Hampshire needs its North Star. It needs to understand that it's not exactly where it wants to be, but it knows how to move in that direction. But the only way it can keep consistently moving in the right direction is if it's got its, you know, it's got its North Star. It's got its truly free society that might be a unrealistic dream, but it still needs to be understood, even if your full focus is just on tangible movements in that direction, you still need to know that direction. I think that was one of the things that concerned me, you know, before when I had the sort of bad impression from other people. It wasn't so much about being like sort of puritanical and being, oh, you know, you're not pure enough libertarian, or even these cultural disagreements, because I fully accept that that's all just, you know, libertarian doesn't say anything other than you own yourself, you know, so how you live your life and all of that is totally, you know, that's the whole point of it. That's your business and not mine, kind of thing, you know. So it wasn't that element of it. It was just my concern was that the North Star would be lost along the
Sure.
way. That was my only concern with it. It wasn't, and listening to you has alleviated a lot of that, because obviously it's shown me that there's a lot of people that have a good understanding of this, and also you've been able to describe all these tangible things you've done which are unquestionably moving in the North Star direction, you know, of where we want to go. So, you know, that's great to hear, and it's been really inspiring, you know, listening to you speak. But the reason why, and perhaps if we have another conversation, because I'll probably wrap this one up because we've obviously spoken for a while. But perhaps if we have another conversation, I can kind of give my case for the Nation's Insanity Project and the work I do there. But just to kind of briefly give my kind of justification of not wanting to let go of that element is just to say that, like, you fully convinced me the value of what you're doing with the Free State Project and people moving to New Hampshire. You've sold me on that completely. But what you haven't sold me on is abandoning the other part. Because I do still, even like I said, to use I know the lottery example was terrible because also the whole throwing bad, but the reason why I used the lottery example was more in the regards of the metaphor of something that's very unlikely to happen, but the payoff is huge if it did, kind of thing. And that's kind of how I view my Nation's Insanity Project. Yes, it's so unlikely to happen, but it's like if it did, even if it's 1 in a billion, if it did, that would be such a great thing that it's worth kind of, fighting for. And even if it never happened, and the best we can do is what you're doing, like these movements, even if that's the case, I still feel like the Nations of Sanity Project would provide value by helping to illuminate the North Star, if you like. You know what I mean? Even if it's not making those tangible steps itself, because that's not, as I say, what it's about. And I think what you're doing is probably far more important work, because it's, I mean, and it's like the tangible thing of like the difference between actually freeing slaves and just talking about how slavery is wrong. You know what I mean? And what you're doing is more analogous to the former, and what I'm doing is more analogous to the latter. But I do think that both are important, and I do think that I wouldn't. Yeah, that's my kind of. I don't want to sort of repeat
Yeah,
myself, but that's my
no,
kind of thing.
yeah.
It's
Uh,
I'm sold on what you're doing, but I'm just not ready to abandon what I'm doing.
yeah, the slavery thing. I mean, I consider us still under slavery, right? We're under actually the longer slavery, which is slavery to rulers. And when you try to explain this to the normies out there, they go, "Oh, well, that's not slavery." Right? They make a strong distinction between the rulers owning our bodies and being able to tell us, how we may move our bodies and what we may ingest into our bodies and what we may take out of our bodies, and how we may associate our bodies and how we may labor our body. That's not slavery. No. Slavery has to look like this, and then that's slavery. But so I actually consider myself, when the term I would actually like to utilize is abolitionist. I'm an abolitionist. I'm just removing the slavery that, you said we got rid of slavery. We didn't. We got rid of private slavery. Yeah, which we got rid of the government support of private slavery, which kept the private slavery. But we still have the government slavery. As a matter of fact, in the United States, government slavery increased once they got rid of chattel slavery. Right. So Lincoln is not a big hero for most libertarians in the U.S. because he increased the amount of government ownership over all Americans by removing it. And he wasn't even interested in removing it, but let's pretend like he was. He removes it from this small group, but then he increases it over here, and then he makes it permanent. And I'm going, that was a bad trade-off. But anyway, I don't want to get into that too much.
No,
I do want to say that imagine doing Nation of Sanity amongst people who are flotsam or just the psychopathic authoritarian. Okay. Now imagine trying to do it amongst people who are libertarian. Which is going to be the more fun, more fruitful, hey, let's work this out, find out the problems, actually get something done and get something real. Which you're not who and of those two, who's going to be helping you? Where are you going to get the more help? Right? Where are you going to get the more reality meets theory? Oh, geez, this isn't working. That's as a matter of fact, you might want to take your Nations of Sanity project, turn it into a presentation for the New Hampshire Liberty Forum. Come on over here for a couple of weeks, but part of that be present at the New Hampshire Liberty Forum, and say, here's what you might want to actually have inside the Free State Project, and this is what it looks like. That's something that you might want to do. The trouble, of course, is that you're doing that in an authoritarian state. So you haven't had that gristing, that pushing against reality that we have here on a daily basis. So I would argue that if you really like the Nations of Sanity concept, that you really want to see that go, that you are much better off doing it in a environment like we have, where we're already, I remember I said, here's authoritarian world where we're all subject to the centralized ruler, and here's authoritarian in your head, and the emerging liberty societies are here, right? So you're much better off doing it here than here or here, because this is where the action is. And the last thing I want to say is that I actually do something which I call Free Town Project, which is working with other states and with other countries to right size a concentration strategy for their region. Okay. You have to actually have a lot of other libertarians, though. And it's depending on this on the country and the normal number of libertarians, but we can actually right size an effort to give you concentration to get a small amount of liberty in a very small region. You can't take over all of England. You're not going to be able to do that, but you might be able to take over some small town. And so that's something that I do. I've done it with other countries and other states. Different people are thinking about doing it, but it's a process, and it requires a commitment, and so you could actually get some of the benefits of concentration by doing it with libertarians in, for example, England. So I hold that out as, if you do have a large cohort of libertarians who are really frustrated that they can't turn England all libertarian all at once, I have a solution for them. If they don't want to move to New Hampshire, that's the best solution. Teach us how to speak English. If they don't want to come to New Hampshire, they can actually create a concentration strategy, which is seriously the only one that's proven effective in their area, and they could take over everything from dog catcher to I don't know, constable, and which do you have mayor and
kind of in cities, yeah.
You couldn't take over a city. It'd have to be a small town.
Yeah. I mean, I definitely would love to talk more about that. I mean, but that does kind of allude a little bit to my point with regards to, or a point I was going to kind of make with regards to the fact that there is more than, especially in today's world, there is more than just a geographical region. Like you've just alluded to a way in which you can work with people outside of New Hampshire. And I just think that's an important element. Like it's, obviously concentrating people to New Hampshire is great, but also where and when that's not possible or feasible, there's still things we can do together. There's still ways that we can kind of connect and work together, whether it's helping people create other new versions of New Hampshire in other places, or whether it's, trading partnerships. And, so I suppose that's the other element of it. And again, none of this is an argument against. This is more just an argument for supplementation, for, well, let's do this as well. Let's do this as well. And I would still obviously say, well, let's, obviously I'm still doing my Nations of Sanity project thing as well. But also I just think that that's something we could do. Like, say, for example, maybe Econ Broker moved to New Hampshire. Maybe he can't, but maybe he can connect with people in New Hampshire and other libertarians in other parts of the world and help each other in different ways, whether it's helping him build a New Hampshire in Nigeria, or whether it's helping just with certain elements of that. I mean, one of the things that's great about the work that he's doing is he's trying to bring obviously a lot of these ideas to people that haven't been exposed to them, and he's printing out free copies of different books and stuff like that, so people can, and obviously he's educating himself, and he's doing loads of great work. And I just think it's, it would be great if he could move over to New Hampshire and be part of that, but it would also be great if he could just connect with other libertarians in New Hampshire and in other places, like he has done with me. And I just feel like there's that kind of like the same ethos that you're practicing in the geographical region of New Hampshire. I feel like that can expand into other into other localities and stuff. So that's just another kind of way. Again, none of this is, I do want to be extra clear, and I've said it over and over, but none of this is arguing against the Free State Project in New Hampshire. It's just saying I wouldn't put every single one of my eggs in that basket. I'd leave an egg. I would still put an egg with the Nations of Sanity Project, and I'd still put an egg with the idea of this, which you've obviously alluded to yourself. So it's obviously not something you excluded either, because you've talked about it yourself, about working with people outside of New Hampshire and helping them to create something similar there. So I still think, I think you yourself have unwittingly or wittingly made this a little bit of a case for what I'm saying with regards to in addition to the work that you're doing with the Free State Project in New Hampshire, there is still value in that connection with other people, around the world, and finding ways in which we can work together. And even, I know, there's that kind of meme about libertarians just want to debate all day, but even that has its value, because it helps us with our North Star. It helps us keep us on track, because there are times when, because the problem is that sometimes there are issues that divide people, and rather than people just being divided and and things falling apart, the debate can help people kind of find a common ground, or at least clarify why they disagree, and really kind of ask the question, okay, is this actually a deal breaker, or is this just something where we kind of differ but we can still live in peace because we're ultimately libertarians? You know what I mean? So so none of what I'm saying is any kind of an argument against what you're saying, other than to just kind of push back a little bit with the whole, although I do fully understand where you're coming from, because everything you're saying rings true with regards to how hopeless and almost pointless it seems to be trying to convert the normies all around the world. But I still hope, like I say, even if it's like a lottery ticket hope, I still hold out that little glimmer. And just to go back to that abolition example, slavery abolition example again, because I agreed 100% with what you said about it's not really been abolished properly. But that's kind of my point. That's why I kind of want to do it properly with the Nations of Sanity project. Like, that total abolition that you're talking about is kind of what the Nations of Sanity project is. It's like, okay, we abolished slavery, but we didn't really do it because we didn't do it properly, because we just abolished this one element, and we done it under ruling authorities and all the rest, all these contradictions and part of it. And I'm just saying, well, as much as it's unlikely, and as much as it might seem like a utopian dream, and as much as we shouldn't um, focus on this at the expense of things like, the Free State Project or anything, which are more tangible, movements in the direction we want to go, I still think there's a reason to just kind of still fight that battle, because as unlikely as it is, and I know slavery wasn't abolished properly, but more what I was referring to was the fact that those flotsams that we spoke about, that all supported slavery when it was quote unquote legal, and now are opposed to it now that it's quote unquote recognized as a crime. I just feel like we can do that with self-ownership as a whole, and we can, and even the Flotsams would go along with it, because they couldn't really argue against it, and because it has that. So that's all. I mean, that's my only kind of, I wouldn't even call it pushback, but kind of little sort of defense for that other aspect of the work, is just to say that I still think there is value in that, just from that aspect of it, and also what you mentioned about the work that even you do outside of New Hampshire with regards to helping people in other parts of the world.
Yeah, one of the things that we're finding is that all those other strategies that I talked about that don't really work that well in the authoritarian states, they actually start working a lot better the higher concentration that you have. So what we're noticing here in New Hampshire, we're only about a quarter, a little bit over a quarter through our diffusion towards our target. It's really slow. We actually bit off more than we can chew, but we've learned so much, and we've had far better results than we would have expected. But what we're learning is that all those other strategies that we had tried in the authoritarian 49 that had failed, right? You can't try the concentration strategy really all that well when you're isolated, but you can try these other ones. They actually start working a lot better with higher concentrations, and the more concentration, the better they work. So one of my imaginations of a path that might happen in the future, and all of this is empirical, Matthew. We don't need to argue. We can just try things out. I have this year my motto is build, don't bitch. Stop bitching about things. Try it out. Let's see it. And, if it works, it works. If it doesn't, let's try something else. Stop bitching. Everyone wants to try to figure everything out in their head, and I go, let's build stuff. So I'm very prejudiced on building right now. But what I see is you have a bright spot of liberty in New Hampshire. That's really, we got a 21-year head start on everybody else, right? And we've got just gigantic amounts of concentration, and we're rolling along. But I could actually see where you get a little dot here, little dot over in this country, a little dot here in this country. And now we start networking all these little dots together, right? And now we have like these little prototypes, and it's like, oh geez, and this little dot saying, we have these types of freedoms, but what we're really going for is this dot. And this dot, of course, is expanding. And these actually, and people who say, yeah, I've enjoyed this level of concentration, but I'm ready for this level of concentration. So I see kind of this network of dots scattering around, and the free state actually being, here's what we've learned. Here's our do's and don'ts. We have mathematical models for how to do this better and do it worse. So if you want to do it worse, actually, we don't need to help you with that, but we could help you do it worse because we've done it worse. But we can teach you how to do it better and faster and more effectively. So I see that as being a real possibility. I'm not a particularly young man, so I don't know how many more years I have. And I could see starting something up that could actually create that. So it's not going to be, oh, the whole world is free. It's going to be, we have these pockets of freedom, and they're starting to expand, and people are going to them going, oh, that's kind of interesting, and they can like point to each other, and they can learn from each other. And now we're getting a resonance going. Okay. That's what I see. But it has to have the key element. The key element to any liberty society is what, Matthew? I told you the answer at the beginning. What is the answer? Tell me you know it. What is the answer to the key element for a liberty society?
Self-ownership.
Libertarians.
Oh, right. Sorry. Okay.
Concentrations of libertarians who believe in self-ownership. That'd be good. That'd be fantastic. But no, it's not these theoretical concepts. It's just numbers. You need the culture. You need the people. You need the flotsam that looks to everybody else. Well, what do you think about it? You need a couple of other people in that audience go, oh yeah, no, that makes total sense. Oh yeah, I do too now. That's what you need. You need that thing to get everybody moving in that liberty, because we have plenty of psychopaths who are pushing slavery to rulers because that works for them. We need people pushing the other way.
Yeah.
Listen,
I
thank
agree.
you so
Sorry,
much. I have to actually run, but I think we're getting a little bit close to 4, and I want to for my time. So I don't want to go too much longer, but I'll let you wrap us up. And
yeah, no, I will. I'll finish it up. But yeah, we have gone for a little bit longer. I just enjoyed the conversation so much, and I do really appreciate you taking the time. I'll tell you what. I'll finish up just by saying one final thing that kind of came to me as you were speaking there was one other thing I want to say about the two-pronged approach, like the tangible work you're doing, and then the kind of persuading people and about the philosophical aspects of it that I'm obviously trying to do, and people like Econ Bro are doing, and that is, I don't think these two approaches are mutually exclusive with regards to the benefits to each other, because obviously someone like myself or Econ Bro can point to places like New Hampshire when we're doing our trying to convert people, and it's a great example for that. And also, the converting people is how you get the libertarians that can move to New Hampshire or already be there. You know what I mean? It's like, I mean, maybe and maybe not, but maybe Econ Bro's work will eventually create enough libertarians in Nigeria that he can create a New Hampshire, or at least it's more of a feasible kind of thing, than it is that way. And maybe with those, like I feel like the two things, in addition to not wanting to let go of both, because I feel like both are worth pursuing, but also I feel like both feed into each other a little bit. You know what I mean? That kind of persuading people, the more people you persuade, that's the more people that you can then concentrate into these New Hampshire style setups. But also the New Hampshire style setups help your case with the conversion as well, because you can show them tangible. So as well as getting them to agree with the principle of you own your body and all the rest of it, the next thing that obviously comes out from them is, yeah, but how would this work and how would that work? And you can point to it and you can say, well, this is how it would work, and this isn't theory, this has actually happened. This is actual nuts and bolts, tangible data, as you say. So anyway, I will wrap it up because we've gone on for long enough, but I really
Yeah,
appreciate you
thank
taking
you
the
very
time.
much for inviting me on. I appreciate it. I appreciate David, who is the one who's recommended us to getting together. And I know that you were frustrated. You're going, well, that's not libertarian. That's and we probably should have a discussion about kind of tolerance of the different people at different stages or different slants or different tribal morals, and how do we fit these things together. I'm more of a voluntarist, so I concede that people will want rules and will want societies that have various types of rules, and they're going to not want people in there who violate their norms, and it's like, okay, that's fine. We and like I said, we see that here. So I'm glad that he actually kind of said, hey, you might want to talk to Dennis. I do have a kind of a bigger view of what's going on here, and my fingers are crossed like heck, because this has been the most exciting stuff that's ever happened in my life. So
Well, I'm really glad, and thank you, David, because I'm really glad he did send me in your direction. Because, yeah, prior to speaking to you and prior to learning about you, I'd heard of the Free State Project, but it didn't pique my interest anywhere near as much as it has now that I've learned more about it. So I really appreciate that, and I hope to speak to you again because I think there'll be some other great conversations to be had. So thank you for your time.
I look forward to that. I look forward to that, Matthew.
Thank you, Dennis.